I think that's, yeah, exactly, and I think what we're dancing around is two things, one in the government and one in corporate. And let me see if I can phrase this in the right way. What you get for the Democrats is in opposition to the Republicans, honestly. It's like the Democrats and the Republicans functionally are going to do fairly similar things in office, right?
Yeah.
Which is very little for working people, and probably some benefits for whatever section of the ruling class is more favorable to them at the time. What the Democrats do is they acknowledge problems, right?
Mm.
That's something that Joe Biden actually says earlier in the NAACP league, is that words matter. What the president says matters, right? So Joe Biden will acknowledge climate change, will acknowledge structural racism, will acknowledge all of these problems. We'll acknowledge the fact that working people aren't getting paid their fair share, right? But when it comes to action, you don't get very much, right? So it's symbol and symbolic there. And what we're seeing too in the corporate world, in the ads, which Joe Biden is talking about, is a push for a more just society. I mean, people are in the ads are healthy and are taken care of, have their needs met, right? They're presenting a world that is better, right? So they're selling us a desire that we as a society, I think, have, and comes from and it's the correct one and a genuine one, which is to live in a beautiful American society, a multiracial society where everybody's taken care of and people aren't being thrown out of their homes in the middle of a pandemic. People aren't worried about getting basic medicine. People aren't worried about their children being sent off into another war. People aren't worried that their child will never have a fulfilling life because they will constantly working for a boss, right? What both of these systems, the government and the corporate world, have done very well, have been to find a very organic and true, I think, desire that people are waking up in this country and really starting to demand and advocate for, and we're advocating it for it in our own ways. And the biggest problem, and this is to sort of move it to where I was hoping we could get this conversation for a little bit, for most people, when they think about politics, politics, the way that people like consume politics and think about politics is through culture, right?
Mm.
It's like a cultural thing, instead of an action. And hell, it obviously has nothing to do with the economy in most people's imaginations, right? So what they're doing is they're finding this kind of political demand and they're mediating it through culture, and they're mediating it through through media and all of this, right? And the real struggle that I think we have right now is to try to find a way to take the actual desire in society that is being just used to benefit the worst offenders in society, and also the the worst systems in society, and trying to find a way to motivate that to use into the actual struggle that we need, which is class struggle.
Hmm. Yeah, I I think one huge problem is that the Democrats and the Republicans, and actually here I'm going to mostly blame the Democrats, had a huge hand in creating this problem because for the last 40 or whatever, 40 or 50 years, at least in the US, the two parties have been converging on economics, which
Mhm.
means that the Democrats have been moving right on economics, but at the same time the two parties have been moving apart on culture stuff, right? I mean, you have the Republicans who have sort of gone, full throttle with their culture war against abortion, against, gay marriage, name whatever right wing cause you can think of, and then the Democrats I think have responded in kind where I mean obviously Planned Parenthood is great, we need to fund Planned Parenthood, they are very important, but all of these democratic institutions and apparatuses have sort of circled the wagons and made those issues sort of come to the fore as well.
Mhm.
So at this point you have two parties that both you know take money from Wall Street essentially. And the thing that differentiates them is really the cultural stuff. And that's it. I mean, so, if you are a person who is interested in a more left economic program, like where are you going to go? I
Mhm.
mean, like for us, like we probably end up voting for Democrats like half the time, sort of against our better judgment, or as sort of a lesser of two evils. But I think a lot of people are getting left out of the political process.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no doubt about that, and yeah, and I think you're right. Like, it's definitely true to put the onus there on the Democratic Party, because at least like on some level, and it was very shallow at that when it existed on any level, but on some level we're supposed to be the party that's standing up for working people.
Right.
What's amazing in the parts of the country that I'm from, the South and Texas, is that the Republicans play better working class politician, like working class politics on TV. Obviously, in office, like the complete opposite. It's very funny, like especially in a lot of those states, the people who the Democrats put up are always these kind of characters who are very, very clearly silver spoon lawyer characters, and the people who the Republicans put forward. I'm thinking people like Ted Cruz, Tim Scott, Lindsey Graham are the same character, but they play up this kind of like, I'm a guy who knows how to get things done. I work like it's the same thing, but it's presented in two very different ways. And the reason for that is because the Democratic Party, like even aesthetically, doesn't want to portray itself as like the working party. At least in
Hmm.
areas I know better, which are the South. Like they put on this whole kind of like, oh, we are the kind of urban, understanding politicians who are the future of this country. Which if you're like just somebody working, it's just like, yeah, screw you. I don't want you to represent me.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean that's like
Hmm.
the Democratic Leadership Council shift in the '80s, right? Like we're gonna be you guys on the Jacobin Show had a recent episode on the PMC, right? We're going to go all in for the PMCs, and well, like this is where we end up. I mean, it seems like this is just a fruition of that strategy.
Right. I mean, this is such a boring thing to say, I feel, but I think that what the left and, to whatever extent the Democrats are interested in this project of reclaiming working class votes, we just really need to foreground bread and butter issues, I think. And
Mm,
I know that sounds like so boring, but we have all of these polls that show that the things that non-voters are interested in are basically more government services.
mhm,
People are interested in a higher minimum wage. I mean, that's not really a government service, but people are interested in social provision. People are interested in healthcare. People are interested in childcare, free education. And I think that the culture war stuff. I think that you're totally right that that's kind of how people have come to understand and internalize politics. But I guess I just feel like lots of people, and especially the people who aren't voting right now, are not so wedded to that stuff that they're not going to get on board with a strong economic program. And honestly, aside from Bernie and like a few other, politicians who have kind of come in his wake, like no one has tried since basically the 1960s.
Yeah, and I feel like an alternate title for this episode is going to be "A Specter of a Backbone is Haunting the Democrats," and it's like you have Warnock and Ossoff on a call earlier this
mm,
afternoon saying like, "Hey, we need to actually get this stuff out because you Joe promised it on the
Mm.
campaign trail, remember?"
Oh
So
God,
it's like
yeah.
there's certain even like I especially Ossoff, I wouldn't expect him to actually do that, except this is just necessity now, like,
mm,
Hmm.
and hopefully that's what's happening is like you hear this new attempt at bipartisanship that Biden's going to happen by, we're going to cut down the 1400 a little bit more. But you already have other senators leaking if that like we don't expect bipartisanship to be possible. So how? I mean, I think we're going to be disappointed, but sorry, I got a little bit
No, I mean,
distracted
No,
there.
I think that the 1400 just like completely gives me the chills. And I mean, I think it's because we sort of knew that the Democrats might cave or might compromise, but the way that they justified rolling back to the 1400 was sort of like, you're stupid. You didn't see that
yeah.
600 plus 1400 equals 2000. And it just like, oh my God, no, like if you had just been totally, monstrous and been like, we changed our minds, obviously that would have been bad. But to kind of like insinuate that, well, we are doing we are doing what we said we would, like, Jesus, I cannot think of anything more alienating than that.
Yeah, it just my like Democrats, they're more concerned with managing democracy than cultivating it
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
the problem.
That's the line. And like, I mean, this is just like, I want to say one quick thing on the culture stuff is that one is like, of course, Jen, you're 100% right that the bread and butter economic issues 100% transcends that, and you're right, and the reason that though that the Democrats lean so much on the culture stuff is because they are so bought out by the interests that are threatened by that, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
and the culture stuff is completely vapid, and that's why it doesn't play, and that's why they are constantly in danger of losing power in places that they should hold it.
Can I just say though, it's worked the last two primaries. I mean,
But it works with
right.
Democratic voters.
But
Right?
that's
And
a big
that's the
problem. Yeah.
right? Because
Right.
the Democratic voters, the people who voted in the primary, are a very different category than the people that we're talking about. And I think it's also really important that Jen was mentioning the non-voters, because that's the class that was like such a key part of the Bernie Sanders like strategy, and it's something that just because people have had to deal with Bernie Sanders losing in the primary twice, people have almost immediately dropped that as understanding like that is like the key to winning. That is the whole idea behind this movement, is to bring in those non-voters. I will say this, and this $1,400 fiasco is another really horrible example of this. What the Democratic Party has done. I say this coming from where I come from. I grew up poor in the South. I know a lot of people, they don't vote, and you talk to them, and this is why I believe in this project. That's why I believe in socialism and in the future, because I know that it's out there. But you talk to people and they're like, yes, I hate the boss. Yes, I think it'd be greater if I owned my own business. Yes, I think we should have Medicare for all.
Right.
And then you say, okay, like let's do something. But what you always hit, and this is the hardest thing that we have to break through, is this wall. And I call it like it's a political depression. And it's very apt, and it's very much so. There's the problem. There's people who always push that the working class is like false consciousness. They don't understand their interests. No, they actually like very correctly make the assessment that participating in politics or doing any of these things is very unlikely to end in their victory, right? Because what they've seen in their entire lives has been not things getting better, not even things staying the same, things getting worse, right? And the people who are making things getting worse being the people in power, both Democrats and Republicans. So what we have to do is the bread and butter issues, but also start finding a way to get people out of that political depression, which means, by the way, not selling people, not tricking people, not telling people that things are more possible in the short term than they are. Like it's like you really have to build up the confidence to do what is necessary.
Question for you. So in the South and in Texas, are the people you're talking about turned off by just candidates having the Democrat by their name?
I mean, it depends. Like I mean, Austin's a different. I'm from Austin, and I also live in South Carolina, right? So Austin's a little bit of a different story. In South Carolina, for sure, because it's like I mean, it's because of the culture stuff. It's like Democrats are weak and they're lawyers. I mean, especially in South Carolina, like they're like they dress and they act like your boss. They act like the person who looks down on you.
Yeah.
They do it to themselves with the way that they campaign in that state in particular.
Yeah.
And even the people who they do vote for, who are Democrats, they do everything that they can to say, oh, I'm not like the national Democrats, right? I'm a very different character, which can sometimes mean that they're conservative, and most often does.
In North Dakota, that's Heidi Heitkamp.
Yeah. But the thing is, you also get, with the Democrats too, is not only that they're doing the bad culture stuff, but that they're wishy-washy. It's like, oh, why would I vote for this guy?
Exactly.
Who's not going to deliver anything to me,
Mhm.
anything for me either, right? They're going to give me the same thing. Might as well just be a part of the team that's going to win. 'Cause at the end of the day, there's a part of it that people like. That no one likes to pick the losing horse,
Mhm.
even if it doesn't really affect their life. And that's definitely something to consider. But I mean, at the end of the day, like I don't think it's worthwhile for the socialist left to figure out a winning strategy for the Democratic Party. What we
Definitely.
what we need to be doing is finding organic folks from those communities to start running and believing in themselves to win, right? Because whatever PR firm the Democratic Party is cooking up in South Carolina is not
It's
going to be
not working.
also, not to rant on too long about South Carolina, but like look at the new head of the DNC, right? Jamie Harrison, who raised more money than any candidate ever in a Senate race and still lost by 11%, right? And they're like, oh, this person needs to be the future of the party. The Democratic, and this is something I just keep on reminding people, the Democratic Party is just as happy to be able to fundraise out of power as they are to be in a very limited power situation as they are right now. And
Yeah.
you need to understand that if you want to beat them, that they aren't going to, they will actually just shoot themselves in their foot like they are doing with these checks right now.
Yeah, I think like the Trump era wasn't a problem really for Nancy Pelosi. I think it was really good for a lot of those type of Democrats because they could pose in a lot of ways. And now I mean, if you're interested in Democrats having evidence and case studies of Democrats failing working people, I think we're in for like salad
Long
days.
night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked the question about whether you thought, voters in sort of rural or traditionally conservative areas would just be turned off by, the little D next to anybody's name is
Yeah.
because on the Jacobin Show a few episodes ago, Paul Prescott was talking about ballot initiatives, and he was looking at one in Arizona, which was a tax the rich initiative. And Arizona, is a red to purple state,
Mhm.
but this ballot initiative did great. And one of his hypotheses was that it's because it wasn't associated with the Democrats. And I think you can see a sort of similar phenomenon in Florida, right? Which voted for Trump, but also passed a $15 minimum wage ballot initiative.
Mhm.
And I think that these are really interesting examples of, I guess, what we might call like bread and butter, like left demands that actually pick up steam in sort of unexpected places. And David, actually, when you were on the Jacobin Show for New Year's Eve, we talked a little bit about the Medicaid expansion in Idaho, which is
Yeah.
another example of a ballot initiative in Idaho is like the deepest red state. So like that shouldn't have flown at all. And mysteriously, or not mysteriously, I mean, we know why it did, but
Right.
Mhm.
unexpectedly it did.
Yeah, and and as I said there, props to Luke Mayville, my former professor, for pushing for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and it's been very successful. But I will say, even in Idaho, it's been an uphill fight because you then
Mhm.
have to deal with the government, which is trying to undermine it. I mean, it's the same reason, though, that like Adolph Reed picked South Carolina very recently to launch his Medicare for All campaign. Like Adolph Reed is working to organize communities around that one single issue. And he picked South Carolina strategically because it has a lot of influence on the primaries, and also as a potential state that like desperately needs that, and that you could really bring a lot of folks together on.
Mhm.
I think the bread and butter stuff is 100% on. Before we go, I just wanted to mention, one quick thing on that, because it just reminded me of like my own life. I grew up a poor kid in the South, and I was a Republican when I was 13, 14, which is embarrassing. It just shows how much of a nerd I was, that I was paying attention to politics and I felt the need. I grew up in a
Why were you a Republican though?
uh,
Like, did you just like to shoot a gun or something?
no, I mean, I grew up in a Democrat. My parents are, Democrats.
Rebellion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, of course.
It
Yeah.
was it was rebellion, but it was also like these people like just are not looking out for you, and just
Mhm.
recognizing, being exposed to it, it's like, yeah, you know what, all of these, like Bill Clinton screwed over the working class or whatever. I was very stupid to be convinced by morons like Sean Hannity that it was the Republican Party that was understood economics, understood the only way to fix it was to put everybody on an even playing field and let them hash it out, right? What changed my mind was literally every issue, right, dude? I think that there was
Right.
like it was like everything
That's all.
everything was like, sort of like cultural or like systemic criticism, right? Sort of vague stuff. But did I support minimum wage increase? Yes. Did I support gay marriage? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did I think that we grew up on welfare and food stamps, and I think those programs need to be cut? No. And it's just because I was a young kid with the undeveloped brain that I didn't put those things together.
Mhm.
But I always hold that close to me, to understand that, like, a lot of people go into these things with their allegiances not really tied actually to those material policies, which means that, and I did a video for Jacobin on this, that's why you should never think about politics in red states versus blue states.
Yeah.
Because if you think that people in that part of the country that are different from you, I'm talking to people who live in like blue states, they really aren't working class people, different cultures, accents, foods, whatever, but people are all dealing with the same issues, and they really do have the same kind of feelings about it. The difference between people who grow up in blue states versus red states is that gets mediated to them through different avenues. So you grow up in South Carolina, you're like, okay, I'm poor. Okay, all the rich people are Republicans. That must mean that they get it a little bit more, and like they have a better understanding of the economy, right? If you grow up in a different kind of community, you're like, okay, the smart people all think this way, right? The teachers in my community all think this way, right? So it gets mediated through different sources, and what we have to do is smash that mediation and get the socialists in there to be able to get people understanding their certain plights and the issues that are important to them, through a kind of socialist lens instead of what is being pumped into them every day.
100%. That is the project ahead, and of course, it is very much an uphill battle. I mean, you had mentioned, the Bernie Sanders campaigns, which were obviously, amazing and inspiring. But at the end of the day, did not draw out quite as many of the non-voters that, we were hoping or planning on
Hmm.
getting. It's just a really hard, and I don't think that was through any sort of fault of the campaign necessarily. I mean, we can
Hmm.
do the kind of like Monday night quarterbacking like all we want. I don't think it was through a fault of it was the fault of the campaign. I mean, it's just a really tough thing, especially to draw out people who, have been kind of sidelined from politics for so long. And he did pretty well, actually, like all things considered. But I also want I do you guys remember Randy Bryce in Wisconsin? He was Iron Stash. He was like
Yeah.
the kind of like Bernie Pratt who, like was a union man and I think he was even a veteran and was kind of this like perfect picture candidate of the guy who was going to like maybe leave some of the Democrats' baggage behind and sort of put forward a Bernie Crat platform. And he lost too, So it's not I don't think it's like a magic fix, but I still am convinced, despite all of that, that this is where we have to start.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll build the momentum.
I think with Bryce, I think you're getting back into the actual baggage of Democrats, regardless. Like, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's like I'm just thinking about North Dakota. If I was running for politics in North Dakota, no chance would I run as a Democrat because you're gonna get smoked. I mean, they used to have these guys who were like centrists and like had the very older farmer vote that used to put it Democrats in, but
Yeah,
now
they
it's
just remember Pepperidge Farms or whatever.
yeah, like now it's just like I mean the cultural baggage against the Democratic Party. I mean that's where I'm like trained. I'm always a lesser evil voter because like ever since I could vote, it's just like the type of people they would run in Senate
Mm.
races in North Dakota. Just these old guys who like even in the newspaper like I ran because the party asked me to. Like I don't really and it just completely decrepit. But and so like
That's so funny.
like that's why like I would love it if something emerged that, like, the ballot line problem. More interested in that, like, trying to solve that. But like, North Dakota has the example of the nonpartisan league, which decided we can run in either primary, and just so happened at that point that the Democratic primaries were more useful, and they eventually
Mm.
got co-opted in the Democratic Party. But yeah, I mean, I would like because I think that is a huge drag. The
Hmm.
Democratic Party is just like Hillary Clinton personified. I think I think a lot of I think like Martin O'Malley would have won 2016. I think Hillary just personified the Democratic baggage so much in a lot of
So well.
places that like yeah she lost on the culture front, which is all they were playing on really.
Well, Jen, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. I hope to do this again sometime soon.
Likewise, this was very fun. Hopefully, you guys will make it onto the Jacobin Show at some point.
Yeah,
And I also want to mention, I feel like this is all coming full circle because you guys probably know that Michael Brooks was the one who told Bhaskar at Jacobin to get a YouTube channel in the first
Yeah.
place, like years ago. And yeah, I think he was gonna like try to help develop the Jacobin Show. And then, of course, obviously, you guys are alums of the Michael Brooks Show, and we're close friends of his. So yeah, it's kind of a meeting of the minds, I guess.
No, I'm really happy to do it. This is how we keep that spirit alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Thanks,
Well, thank you
Jen.
so much, guys.
Yeah, take care. Talk to you soon.